His fingers were already on the man's wrist before his mind caught up with what he was doing. Cold. That was the first thing. The wrist beneath his grip was cold the way metal gets cold. Not the cold of weather, but the cold of something that has been sitting in shadow too long. And the man, this man who smelled like cedar and authority, had gone completely still. Not the stillness of surprise, the stillness of a predator deciding. Darius didn't know the man's name yet. He just knew the car was going to kill him. But let me tell you how we got there.
Darius Okafor had lived in Manhattan for 11 years without once being noticed. That was not an accident. That was architecture. He built his invisibility the way other people built careers, intentionally brick by brick, day by day, with the kind of discipline that doesn't look like discipline because it looks like nothing at all. He was 26, blind since 14, and he had learned, in the years between those two facts, that the world is not cruel so much as it is indifferent. Cruelty requires attention. Indifference is cheaper, easier, and in his experience, far more common.
Hi viewers. Have you ever felt completely invisible in a crowd? Like no one around you even registered that you existed? Drop a yes or a no in the comments. Because what Darius does next with that invisibility is going to change everything. His mornings ran on texture and sound. He knew the 6 train by the particular screech it made at the 59th Street bend, a half pitch higher than the 4, a half second shorter than the 5. He sorted his bus change by edge pattern. Smooth quarters, ridged dimes, the thick plainness of nickels. He knew the security guard outside the Hargrove Financial Building by the sound of his left heel, a worn rubber sole that dragged, just slightly, on the 3rd step down from the lobby entrance. That same guard had nudged him away from the building's front plaza 3 weeks ago. Not hard, not mean even, just a hand on his shoulder and a quiet, "Sir, this area is reserved." Reserved for who Darius had not asked. He already knew the answer. Reserved for people who looked like they belonged. Reserved for people whose presence was considered an asset rather than an inconvenience. He had simply nodded, adjusted the strap of his basket, and moved on. He wasn't angry about it. That was the thing people never understood. He was not angry. He was careful. There is a difference. Anger makes noise. Careful makes distance. And distance, in Darius's experience, was the only real protection available to someone like him. An omega, blind, brown-skinned, living on the fringe of a world that sorted people into categories and then forgot the ones it didn't find useful. He navigated by wind. Seriously, he had mapped the gaps between midtown buildings by the way air pressure shifted when he crossed them. He knew the smell of the hot dog cart on 52nd before he heard the vendor's voice. He knew rain was coming before any app said so, because the concrete gave off a particular mineral smell when the sky was thinking about opening up. This was his city. Not the glamorous version. Not the version on postcards. The version underneath. The version made of sounds and pressure and scent. The version that most people walk through without ever actually touching. He was crossing 54th Street on a Thursday morning in October, basket looped over his forearm. He sold handmade leather key fobs and small woven bracelets near the Plaza District, nothing that required permits if you moved often enough. When he heard it. Russian. Not tourist Russian. Not the stumbling phrasebook kind you heard near Times Square. This was low. Deliberate. 2 voices, close together, near a vehicle idling at the curb. Darius slowed. His cane found the edge of the curb. He stopped there, adjusted his basket, made himself look like a man resting. The words came in fragments. Zazaganai, trigger, distantiony, ignition, trigger, remote. He didn't move. Not yet, because there was something else. Underneath the exhaust, underneath the rubber and asphalt smell of a midtown morning. Something metallic. Not engine metal. Not the clean bite of new parts. Something hotter. Something that didn't belong. His pulse climbed into his throat and stayed there. He stood very still on that curb, the October air moving past him, and he thought about all the ways he could be wrong. He thought about all the ways a man with a cane and a basket of key fobs does not get to walk up to a black car outside a financial tower and say he heard something. He thought about all of that. And then the car door opened. He heard expensive shoes on pavement. Unhurried. Confident. The stride of a man who has never once had to rush because the world waits for him. Darius's hand was already moving before the thought finished forming. He didn't know why. He would think about that later, in a glass office he hadn't expected to survive, and he still wouldn't have a clean answer. He just knew the car was wrong. And so he reached out into the cold October air and grabbed the stranger's wrist. The silence that followed was the loudest thing he had ever heard. The wrist didn't move. That was the first thing that told Darius this man was different. Most people, when a stranger grabs them on a public street, they pull back. They gasp. They make some version of the noise people make when they're startled.
This man did none of that. He went still, controlled, like a system switching from one mode to another. Darius felt it in the pulse point beneath his thumb. Elevated, not afraid, calculating. Don't get in that car. His voice came out steadier than he felt. 3 words. He said them the way you say something you've already decided to say, even though part of you is screaming to stop. The 2 Russian voices had gone quiet. That was worse. Silence from men who were just talking is not neutral. It is the sound of attention shifting. It is the sound of situation being assessed. Darius knew, in the particular way that blind people learn to read what the sighted rely on their eyes to catch, that the men near the car had turned toward him. He could feel it. The pressure of being looked at is real. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Who are you? The man's voice was low. Not a shout, never a shout, but there was weight in it. The kind of weight that has been practiced over years until it settles into a person's chest like concrete. Nobody, Darius said. I am nobody. But that car has been modified, and the men near it were discussing remote ignition, and you need to not get inside it.
A beat. 1 second. Maybe 2. Dmitri. The man spoke sideways, not to Darius. 1 word. A name or a command. Maybe both. Movement behind Darius then. Shoes on concrete. 2 sets, coming fast. Hands on his arms, not rough, not yet, but firm. Restraining. Darius didn't fight it. Fighting was a game he couldn't win, and he knew it. He let his cane touch the ground. He kept his hands open. I'm not a threat, he said, still calm, which was impressive considering his heart was making a sound like a fist hitting a wall. I'm just telling you what I heard. What you heard. The man repeated it flatly. Russian. 2 men. By the vehicle. The words were Zazaganai, Distantiony, and Spuskovoy Kryachok. He used the correct pronunciation because he had learned Russian from a woman named Helena who did not accept laziness in language. That's ignition, remote, and trigger. In that order. Silence again. Different this time. Heavier. Then, check the vehicle. The hands on Darius's arms did not let go, but the pressure changed. Watchful now instead of aggressive. He heard footsteps move toward the car. He heard the low, careful sound of someone checking underneath. He stood there in the October morning with 2 men holding his arms and counted his heartbeats to keep himself from doing something stupid. The metallic smell was still there. It was stronger now that he was paying attention to it. High and sharp, not oil, not exhaust. Something manufactured. Something that had been placed there on purpose and was waiting. He heard the intake of breath before the words came. Sir. A guard's voice. Very controlled. You need to step back from the vehicle. The pressure on Darius's arms shifted again, this time pulling him backward, away from the curb, 2 quick steps. Then more voices. More movement. The controlled chaos of a situation being contained before it can become a spectacle. Darius stood in the middle of it, breathing. The man with the cold wrist had not moved far. Darius could still smell him. Cedar and something underneath that, like iron that has been cleaned but not entirely. Like old cold and new control. Pheromones, his body registered unhelpfully. Alpha. Strong signature. Careful rather than aggressive. Darius told his body to be quiet and focus. 3 minutes passed. Maybe 4. It felt longer the way dangerous minutes always do. Then, from somewhere to his left, a guard said 2 words in a voice stripped completely flat. It's confirmed. Darius exhaled once. Slow. Through his nose. He heard the man with the cold wrist turn toward him. He heard him take one step closer. The men who were near the car, Darius said quietly, before the man could speak. The two who were speaking Russian. Are they still there? A pause. No, the man said. Of course they weren't. They had walked away the moment Darius grabbed that wrist. Patient. Prepared for failure. Gone before anyone thought to look. Darius processed that. It meant this wasn't random. It meant someone had planned for things to go wrong. It meant the people who wanted this man dead were careful enough to have an exit already built into the plan. He should have been thinking about how to leave. Instead, he was thinking about the voice. The weight of it. The way it had said no, like it had already decided what came next. The hand closed around his arm. Not the guards this time. Just one hand. Firm. Deliberate. Come with us, the voice said. And then, before Darius could answer, before he could decide, before he could do anything at all. Bring him. The glass office was on the 41st floor. Darius knew the floor number because he counted the seconds in the elevator, a private elevator key-accessed which told him something, and matched it against the average rise rate of commercial lifts in buildings of this size. 41. Give or take one. He was not usually this precise about things he couldn't verify. He was being precise now because precise was the only thing standing between him and the particular fear that shows up when you are in a room you did not choose to enter, surrounded by people whose faces you cannot read, and you are not entirely sure you are going to be allowed to leave. The office smelled like cold air and expensive wood and the faint ghost of something floral, cleaning product, maybe, or a diffuser somewhere to the left. No windows that opened. Controlled temperature. The kind of space designed to give one person maximum advantage over everyone else inside it. Someone sat him in a chair. The chair was good. Not deliberately uncomfortable, that was a choice too. Footsteps. 3 people in the room. Maybe 4. One positioned directly across from him. 2 at the periphery. The 4th, if there was a 4th, somewhere behind and to the left, very quiet. You speak Russian. A different voice now. Younger. Sharper edges. Some, Darius said. How much is some? Enough to understand what I heard. Where did you learn it? He considered the question. Not whether to answer. He had already decided to be honest, because lying to dangerous people in rooms you cannot escape is a bad strategy. But how to answer without giving more than was asked? An orphanage in Queens, he said. There was a caretaker, Ukrainian woman named Helena Bonder. She taught the kids who were willing to learn. I was willing to learn. Silence. The particular silence of people exchanging looks he couldn't see. An orphanage. The younger voice again. Yes. And you just happened to be walking past the vehicle. I walk that route most mornings. Not a lie. Not all of the truth. I sell handmade goods near the Plaza District. I move positions so I don't need a permit. And you just happen to hear Russian. I hear a lot of things, Darius said. Most people don't realize how much sound they make when they think nobody's listening. That landed somewhere. He couldn't see where, but he felt it. The younger voice started again. We need to verify your... That's enough, Marcus. Cold iron. Cedar underneath it. The man from the car. The younger voice, Marcus. Stopped. Just like that. No argument. No friction. The kind of immediate compliance that only happens when the power in a room is completely one-directional. Darius adjusted his understanding of where he was. Not just wealth. Structure. An organization with actual hierarchy. A man at the top of it sitting across from him right now, studying him in the careful, unhurried way that people study things they haven't yet decided what to do with. Your name, the man said. Darius Okafor. You live in the city. Yes. The shelter on 119th. It was not a question. Which meant they already knew. Which meant someone had already run whatever check they ran in the time between the street and this office. That was fast. That was very fast. Darius filed that detail somewhere useful. Yes, he said. A pause. You knew what you were walking into when you stopped on that street. Darius considered that. I knew something was wrong, he said. I didn't know what would happen after. Most people would have kept walking. Most people, Darius said carefully, would have. Yes. Why didn't you? He didn't answer immediately. Not because he didn't know. He did know in the vague and inarticulate way that honest answers sometimes live in, but because the knowing was harder to say out loud than the facts. Because I heard the words, he finally said, and I knew what they meant. And a man was about to get into a car that was going to kill him. A beat. What would have been the point of knowing if I kept walking? The room was quiet for a moment. Then, from somewhere to his left, very quiet, almost not there, the sound of something being set on a desk. A phone. Or a file. The internal report is in, the quiet voice said. The man across from Darius didn't react. Not outwardly. But the temperature in the room changed. That was the only way Darius could describe it. Something shifted. The particular shift of a man absorbing information that confirms something he already suspected, and finding it worse in confirmation than it was in suspicion. The vehicle was accessed from the inside. The quiet voice continued. Company badge. Level 3 clearance. Level 3. Darius didn't know what that meant in this specific organization, but he understood the implication. This wasn't an outside job. This came from somewhere inside the walls. The man across from Darius said nothing for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice had not changed. Still level. Still controlled. Still carrying that particular weight of someone who has learned not to let what they feel move into their face or their voice. This will take time, he said. And those 4 words were somehow the most frightening thing Darius had heard all morning. Not rage. Not threats. Not the explosion of a powerful man who has just learned someone inside his own organization tried to kill him. Just, this will take time. Patient. Strategic. Already several moves ahead. Darius sat in his chair in the glass office on the 41st floor and understood, for the first time, that he had not simply stopped a car from exploding. He had walked into something much larger than that. And he had no idea yet whether he was going to be allowed to walk back out. 3 days passed. Then a week. Then 2. Darius went back to his route. Back to his mornings. The 6 train, the bus change sorted by texture, the hot dog cart on 52nd. He moved his selling position, he always moved his selling position, and he sold key fobs and woven bracelets and he listened to the city the way he always had. But things had changed. Not loudly. Not in ways most people would notice. The security guard on the Hargrove Plaza, the one who had nudged him away 3 weeks before the car, had been replaced. New heel pattern. New drag on the step. Darius noticed on the second morning. The black car that usually idled on 54th between 9 and 10:15 was gone. Different vehicles now. Different routes, he guessed, though he only had the sound to go on. And once, on a Thursday, he heard someone behind him for 4 city blocks. Not following exactly, just present. At a consistent distance that was not the distance of coincidence. He didn't turn around. He had learned a long time ago that acknowledging something gives it power over you. He just walked, cane touching the familiar concrete, and noted it and filed it. On the 16th day, someone called the shelter's main line and left his name, Kaelor Voss. A number. No other message. The shelter director told him with the specific neutrality of someone who had already looked the name up and found something that made her careful. Darius thanked her and went to his room and sat on his bed and thought about it. He called back from his cell phone. Old thing. Prepaid. The call was answered on the second ring. Mr. Okafor. The voice. Cedar. Cold iron underneath. Thank you for calling. You left your name, Darius said. You didn't have to do that. No, Kaelor Voss said. I didn't. A pause that meant something Darius didn't have enough information to decode yet. I'd like to ask you some questions, Voss said. In person. Somewhere you choose if that makes it easier. Somewhere you choose. Interesting offer from a man who had, 16 days ago, been surrounded by people whose job was to make choices for him. The coffee place on 116th, Darius said. Corner of Lenox. I'll be there at 10 tomorrow. I'll be there at 10 tomorrow, Voss confirmed. And that was the end of the call. The coffee place on 116th was Darius's territory. He knew every table by position, every server by voice, every regular by order and arrival time. He got there at 9:45 and sat with his back toward the wall and his cane within reach and a coffee he didn't drink because his stomach was doing the thing it did when a situation had not finished being dangerous yet. Voss arrived at 9:58. Darius knew him by the stride. He had only heard it once, briefly, on a city sidewalk, but it was distinctive enough. The unhurried length of it, the absence of the small hesitations most people carry, that he recognized it before the door had finished opening. He sat down without being invited. Like sitting down in a space was simply something he did. "You look the same," Voss said. "I can't really say the same," Darius replied. Something in the air shifted, briefly, like a crack in a wall that closes before you can be sure you saw it. That was... Voss stopped, started again. "That was a poor opening. I apologize." Darius sat with that for a moment. Not the apology itself, the fact of it. A man like this, with that kind of weight in his voice and that kind of money behind his name, does not apologize to strangers in coffee shops on 116th Street. Not without deciding to. "What do you want to ask me?" Darius said. "The orphanage," Voss said. "The caretaker, Helena Bonder. She taught at St. Augustine's Home for Boys in Woodside," Darius said. "Ukrainian-American. Came to the U.S. in the early 2000s. She taught language to kids who wanted to learn because she believed language was the thing that couldn't be taken from you. I was there from age 8 to 17. I learned Russian and some Polish and enough Ukrainian to understand the songs she played on her phone when she thought nobody was paying attention." He said it evenly, without sentiment. Not because it didn't carry any, it did, old and solid the way certain things go solid over time. But because sentiment in front of strangers is a different kind of exposure than he was willing to make today. "The internal review," Voss said after a moment. "The individual who accessed the vehicle. Mid-level operations executive. He's been with the company 11 years. Darius said nothing, waiting. He believed he was acting on instructions from above him, that the order had been passed down through 3 layers of chain of command. A pause. It had not. Someone created the paper trail, manufactured the authority. Darius processed this carefully. So the person who wanted you dead was never the person who placed the device. Correct. They used someone else to do it. Someone who thought they were following orders. Correct. And the man who placed it believed he was protected. He did. Darius turned his cup slowly in his hands. The ceramic was warm, specific, real. "You're telling me this because you want me to understand the shape of it," he said. "Yes." "Why?" Silence. "Longer than the others." "Because you're the only person who wasn't supposed to be part of it," Voss said. "And you were the only one who saw clearly enough to stop it." Another pause. "I find that worth understanding. What hurt most wasn't being suspected. Darius had been suspected plenty. Of trespassing, of misrepresentation, of taking up space he wasn't entitled to. He knew that feeling. What sat heavier was something else. The knowledge that a man had been used, convinced he was following legitimate authority, made into a weapon by someone who never had to get their hands dirty. Used and then discarded. Left holding the consequence. That was the shape of it. That was the part that made Darius's jaw tight. "The man who placed it," Darius said. "What happens to him?" Voss was quiet for a moment. "He's been removed from his position. Cooperating with the review. Not arrested. Removed. Cooperating." Darius didn't ask the follow-up question out loud, but Voss seemed to hear it anyway. "The people who manufactured the authority, that's what the time is for," he said. There it was again. Time. Patient. Strategic. "Is there a reason," Darius said carefully, "that you came to tell me this yourself?" Voss did not answer immediately. "You should know," he said finally, "that someone has leaked your involvement to outside networks. We don't know yet who or the full extent." He said it the way someone says something that costs them something to say. "Your shelter may not be as safe as it was." Darius absorbed that. sat with the weight of it. He had grabbed a stranger's wrist on a cold October morning, and now the world outside his shelter was rearranging itself around that single action, and there was nothing he could do to put it back. He set down his cup. "Thank you for telling me," he said. He said it like he meant it, because he did. He walked home the long way, changed his usual route twice, counted the footsteps behind him and noted that there were none this time, which meant either the threat had reduced or gotten better at hiding. He was on his own block, 10 feet from the shelter door, when he heard it. Not footsteps, not voices, the specific sound of a lock being worked from the wrong side. The wrist didn't move. That was the first thing that told Darius this man was different. Most people, when a stranger grabs them on a public street, they pull back. They gasp. They make some version of the noise people make when they're startled. His own room. 3rd floor. The window he knew by its particular rattle. Someone had already been inside. They moved him on a Tuesday. No announcement. Just the shelter director at his door at 6 in the morning, voice carefully flat, telling him to pack what he needed. Car would be outside in 20 minutes. He packed in 12. He didn't have much. That had never been a problem before. Felt like one now. The car smelled like new leather and climate control. One driver, one guard in the passenger seat. Neither spoke. Darius sat in the back and counted turns and tracked direction by the sound the tires made on different surfaces. Smooth highway, rougher city street, the particular silence of a private garage. The residence was somewhere in the upper 60s. East side, he thought. Quiet block. Old building, the elevator had a mechanical sound that digital installations don't make, a low grind and cable tension that belongs to something built before 1970. High ceilings, thick walls, carpeted hallways that swallowed sound. His room was on the 4th floor. Real bed, good mattress. A window that opened, which he checked immediately and noted the direction of the air and the faint sound of traffic below. Not frantic, not gridlocked, the particular pace of a street that doesn't have a lot of reason to rush. Clean bathroom, towels folded in thirds. A small card on the dresser with a phone number and no name. He sat on the edge of the bed and felt, with a completeness that surprised him, like a man in a cage. A very comfortable cage. A cage with good towels and thick walls and someone downstairs whose job it was to make sure nothing bad happened to him. But a cage is still a cage when you didn't choose to be inside it. He stayed 2 days before he asked to speak with Voss directly. The call came that evening. "You feel confined," Voss said. "Not a question." "I feel relocated," Darius said. "Which I didn't choose. You weren't safe where you were. I understand that. Then. Understanding why something happened doesn't mean it's comfortable," Darius said. "I know the difference between a reason and a right." A pause. "That's fair," Voss said. He said it simply, without the armor of qualification or the machinery of justification. Just, "That's fair." Darius sat with that. "You were supposed to be invisible," Voss said after a moment, quieter than his usual register, like the sentence had been sitting somewhere and he was only now deciding to let it out. "That's the part one find." He stopped. "You weren't supposed to be part of this. And now you're in it. Because you did the right thing." "Story of a lot of people's lives," Darius said. Silence. "The internal review," Voss said. "It's confirmed. A mid-level executive authorized the hit. He believed he had sign-off from the board. He did not. The paper trail was created by someone with access to internal communications at a level that required significant trust to achieve." "Someone close to you," Darius said. "Yes. And they're still inside your organization. For now," Voss said. "The audit is in process. We're watching, not moving. If we move too early, we lose the full network. If we wait," he stopped. "If you wait, they might try again," Darius finished. Yes. Darius absorbed that. The shape of it. The particular patience required to sit inside a danger you can see coming and not move, because moving wrong was worse than staying still. He understood that kind of patience. He had been practicing it for years. "Has it gone public yet?" he asked. "No. Contained for now. But the leak about your involvement, we've traced it to an outside communications channel. Someone tipped a private network. Not media. Something more structured. Darius turned that word over in his mind. Structured. He thought about the days after the car. The invisible follower 4 blocks behind him. The lock worked from the wrong side of his window. The shelter director's carefully flat voice at 6 in the morning. These were not random events. These were a sequence. Sequences had sources. What do they want with me? He said. A long pause. The longest one yet. You're the only external witness, Voss said. You heard the conversation. You can identify the phrases. You stopped the vehicle. Your testimony, if formalized, becomes a problem for anyone who doesn't want this fully investigated. So they wanted him quiet, or gone, or... And this was the part his mind kept circling back to, compromised in some way that made what he'd heard less credible. You're keeping me here because it's easier to protect a fixed location, Darius said. Yes, and because if something happens to me, nothing will happen to you, Voss said. The weight in his voice had shifted. Harder now, flatter, like a decision rather than a sentence. Darius noted it. I'd like to be useful, he said. While I'm here. I'm not good at waiting without purpose. Another pause. There may be something, Voss said carefully. The audit team is reviewing communications. There are calls, some of them multilingual. If you're willing. Russian, Darius said, and some Polish, and I pick up patterns fast. I know, Voss said. He knew. He had probably known before he called. He was the kind of man who gathered information before he needed it, who filed capabilities in advance of the situations that would require them. Darius noted that too. Tomorrow morning, Voss said, someone will come to your room with materials. If you're willing. I'm willing. He ended the call and sat in the quiet of the 4th floor room and listened to the building. The hum of the elevator. Someone's footsteps in the hall guard rotation. Regular pattern, 2 hours. The faint sound of street below. On the 3rd day, a message reached him through the shelter director, forwarded to the number on the card on his dresser. One of the younger residents had found Darius's selling spot on 52nd. Someone had taken it. No trouble, just taken. His regular customers were asking. He read the message twice. Then he thought about something Helena Bonder had told him once in the Woodside orphanage, when he was 11 years old and still learning how to be blind in a world that moved fast and cared slowly. She had said, the first thing they take is always the small thing. The space at the corner. The habit. The routine. Not because the small thing matters. Because taking it tells them whether you'll fight for what comes next. He set the message down and made his second call of the evening. Not to Voss. To a lawyer. A woman named Celestine Adeyemi who had helped him once before with a shelter residency dispute and who he knew, from that one experience, was the kind of person who wrote everything down and charged what the work was worth. He left her a message explaining that he might need her soon. He didn't know yet exactly why. He just knew, with the particular clarity of a man who has learned to trust what he hears instead of what he's shown, that the audit and the structured network and the mid-level executive who believed he was following orders, all of it was still moving. And it wasn't done moving yet. His shelter was broken into. His spot was taken. His name was out. And somewhere in a building he couldn't see, in a network he hadn't yet fully mapped, someone was watching the audit and watching Kaelor Voss and watching. He was now quite sure, the blind man on the 4th floor who had heard too much on a cold October morning. They were watching, which meant they were worried. And worried, in Darius Okafor's experience, was the one thing dangerous people never wanted to be. So tell me, now that you know what he's walking into, what do you think Darius should do? Trust Voss completely? Keep his own exits? Or something in between? Because the answer changes everything that comes next. The contractor said the wrong name on a Tuesday afternoon, and that was how Darius found out. He had been sitting in the 4th floor room for 11 days. 11 days of audio files and translated fragments and the low, patient work of listening to conversations that other people thought no one would ever understand. 11 days of Voss's team coming and going with materials, of quiet dinners on a tray, of learning the building's rhythms the way he always learned rhythms, by ear, by repetition, by the slow accumulation of pattern into knowledge. He had started to feel not comfortable exactly, but oriented, which was not the same thing. But it was something. The work itself kept him from going entirely inward. That was the thing that surprised him. He had expected to feel caged by it. The same materials, the same room, the same controlled environment day after day. Instead, the work grounded him. Something about having a specific skill that was actually needed, actually useful in a real and serious way, was different from what he was used to. He sold key fobs and woven bracelets near the plaza because he was good with his hands and because it didn't require documentation and because he could move when he needed to move. It was practical. It was survival. This was different. A team member named Jerome, young voice, measured pace, the particular precision of someone trained to deliver information without editorializing, brought him recordings each morning. Some were phone calls. Some were intercepted communications from sources Darius did not ask about and Jerome did not volunteer. All of them were multilingual in ways that mattered. Darius would listen. He would note fragments, phrases, the way certain words were stressed in Russian when a speaker was under pressure versus when they were comfortable. The difference between Polish spoken by a native versus a practiced second language speaker. The code switching that happened when two people spoke one language but thought in another. A small tell that was, to Darius's ear, as obvious as a wrong note in a familiar song. Jerome collected his notes. He never told Darius what happened next with the information, and Darius had decided that was probably appropriate. He was useful. He was not in charge. There is a difference. He had spent the first few days uncomfortable with that distinction. The shelter on 119th had been his environment, known, mapped, navigable. The risks of it were familiar risks, the kind he had developed responses to over years. Here, in this building with its key-accessed elevator and professionally neutral staff and tray dinners, he was inside someone else's structure, someone else's rules. The rules were not unkind. They were just not his. He was sitting with that thought on the 11th morning, running his thumb over a leather key fob he had brought with him, one of his own, a habit he kept because the texture grounded him when his hands needed something to do. When the knock came, building maintenance, a voice said through the door. Darius unlocked it. The man was professional, efficient. He had the body language of someone who has done a job so many times it has become automatic. Darius could tell by the way his footsteps moved directly to the bathroom without the hesitation of someone unfamiliar with the space, by the sound of his toolbox set down with the confidence of habit. The faucet repair took about 20 minutes. Darius sat near the window and listened and said nothing, and was about to return to the morning's files when the man pulled out his phone. "Yeah, I'm at the Voss property on 68th, the man said. "Should be done in 10. He said it without thinking. The way people say things when they are in a room with someone they have already decided doesn't need to be considered. Darius stayed completely still. He waited until the contractor left, until the door clicked shut and the footsteps moved down the hallway and the elevator engaged at the end of the corridor. Then he sat on the edge of the bed and turned the information over in his mind with the same care he turned everything over. The contractor knew the name. The contractor knew the address. That information was in whatever system generated his work order, which meant it was in a building management database. And databases, in Darius's experience, were only as secure as the people with access to them, which was never fully secure. He thought about the shelter break-in. The window worked from the wrong side, the structured network that Celestine had mentioned. He thought about the patience of people who want something buried. How they don't rush, how they work in layers, how they use ordinary channels to reach extraordinary information. A building maintenance database. An address. A name attached to it. He picked up the phone on the nightstand. Called the card number. Voss answered in 2 rings. "The contractor who was just here," Darius said. "He knew your name and this address." Said it out loud on a phone call. Silence. The calibrating kind. "I'll look into it," Voss said. "I'd like to know how a maintenance worker had that information." "So would I." A pause shorter than the strategic ones. More immediate. "Are you all right?" The question landed in a place Darius hadn't expected. Not the "are you alright" of damage control. Not the "are you alright" of managing a resource. Something closer to the kind of question a person asks when they actually want to know the answer, regardless of what they'll have to do about it. Darius considered it honestly. "I feel like a fixed location that people keep finding," he said. Another pause, and this one carried a different weight. "I owe you something," Voss said. Darius said nothing. Waited. "The shelter on 119th. Voss's voice was measured, controlled. The voice of a man saying something he has been holding and has now decided to release. "The renovation work that started last week. The new roof. The upgraded electrical panel. The kitchen resurfacing." Darius hadn't known about the kitchen. "That was arranged through a foundation," Voss continued. "Third party. Anonymous grant. You were not supposed to know the source." Darius sat very still. He had heard about the renovation from the shelter director. She had been pleased and puzzled, confused the way good people get confused when something unexpectedly good happens and they cannot trace it to its source. He had accepted her explanation without pulling at the thread. He had been tired. He had been in the middle of something. He had filed it under good news and moved on. He was pulling at the thread now. "Why?" he said. Simple. Direct. "Because the building needed it," Voss said. "And because," a pause, "the kind that has something real behind it. You were drawn into danger because of circumstances connected to me. The least that could be stabilized should be stabilized. The shelter matters to the people who depend on it." "Without telling me," Darius said. "Yes. Why without telling me?" The pause this time was the longest yet. Darius counted 4 seconds. "Because gratitude creates debt," Voss said. "And I don't want you indebted to me." Darius sat with that sentence, turned it over, examined its edges. Because gratitude creates debt. That was not the logic of charity. Charity comes with the expectation of appreciation, the subtle, never quite spoken requirement that the recipient understand who gave and be appropriately grateful. The transaction is dressed up, but it is still a transaction. This was different. This was a man who had the means to do a thing and had done it while specifically building the conditions that would prevent it from creating an obligation. Deliberately, with forethought. That was not what Darius had learned to expect from power. Power kept a running tally. Power knew what it was owed and made sure you knew too. Power gave with one hand and noted the giving with the other. This was something else. "Protection without recognition feels different," Darius said slowly, almost to himself. "It feels like respect." Voss said nothing, but he didn't disagree. The silence between them held. Darius pulled himself back to the practical, because the practical was what he could act on. "The address is compromised," he said. "Whether the contractor is connected to anything larger or it was just careless record-keeping, either way, this location is in a database that exists outside your control. Anyone with access to building management records, or anyone who knows someone with that access, can find it." "I know," Voss said. "We're moving you in the morning." "Where?" A pause. "Somewhere I can account for every person with access." Darius noted the specificity of that. Not somewhere safer, that would have been the easier thing to say. Somewhere I can account for. First person. Singular. A space within his own direct control rather than delegated through a management company or a third-party system. He filed that without commenting on it. "All right," he said. "Darius." His name said with the particular weight of someone who has decided to be direct. "The internal audit is close. Days possibly. When it reaches the origin point and the restructuring is announced, people inside the organization who are connected to what happened will know before it goes public. They will know the window is closing. And they'll move," Darius said. "People who are about to lose everything move," Voss said. "Yes. Then the next 48 hours are the most exposed." "Yes." Darius thought about the kind of patience required to sit inside a danger you can see forming and not move. To keep your hands still and your face neutral while a clock ran somewhere you could feel but not see. He understood that kind of patience. He had been practicing it for years. "The executive who authorized the hit," Darius said. "What happens to him?" He's cooperating fully, Voss said. He won't face criminal charges. The weight of what's coming falls on the person who created the false chain of command. The one who manufactured the authorization. And that person, Darius said, is still in the building, Voss said quietly. For now. 48 hours. Darius sat in the fourth-floor room with the repaired bathroom faucet and the good mattress and the towels folded in thirds, and thought about 48 hours being a very long time when someone who wanted things buried knew the clock was running. Get some sleep, Voss said. You too, Darius replied. Came out before he waited. The natural conversational response of someone who has started treating another person like a person rather than a category. He heard Voss go quiet. Not the calculating quiet, something softer and shorter, and then the call ended. Darius lay back on the bed. The building settled around him. The pipes, the elevator, the faint noise of the street at this hour, reduced but never entirely gone. This city never fully going quiet. He thought about the shelter, a new roof, a new electrical panel, a kitchen resurfaced. He thought about the 43 people who lived at St. Augustine's Community Shelter on 119th Street, who were going to spend the winter in a building with a roof that didn't leak, and lights that didn't flicker, and who would never know that the reason was a blind Omega who grabbed a stranger's wrist on a cold October morning. He didn't know what to do with that. He let it sit, unresolved, while the building settled and November moved toward its end. In the morning, before the car arrived, Celestine Adeyemi called. I looked into the structured network, she said. Celestine did not produce preamble. Information arrived in her voice already sorted and prioritized. Private intelligence relay. 3 shell entities. 2 of the 3 have registered addresses in Cyprus. The third traces to a holding company in Delaware with a registered agent who manages 412 other entities. Darius sat up. Darius, she said. Her voice had the note she used when she wanted him to understand the weight of something without being dramatic about it. Who exactly are you involved with? A situation, he said. Cyprus Shells and a Delaware holding company, she said. That is not a situation. That is architecture. He almost laughed. I know, he said. She was quiet for 3 seconds. 3 deliberate seconds. She used them the way other people used highlighters, to mark the important thing. I'm filing a protective legal record today, she said, documenting your involvement. The timeline of events from October. The shelter break-in. The relocation. Sealed but time-stamped and notarized. If anything happens to you, if anything changes in any direction that affects your safety or your legal standing, there is a paper trail that exists outside of any single person's willingness to cooperate. Celestine, that is not pessimism, she said firmly. That is infrastructure. Let me build you infrastructure. A pause. Yes, he said. All right. Good. Send me your new address when you have it. She paused. And Darius, be careful who you're in the room with. Not because the people around you are bad, but because careful is still the right habit even when you're somewhere safe. She ended the call. He sat for a moment with the phone in his hand. Careful is still the right habit even when you're somewhere safe. He had told himself something like that for years, but it had meant something different then. Careful as armor, careful as withdrawal, careful as the strategy of a person who believes the only way not to get hurt is not to be present. Celestine meant something different by it. She meant, pay attention, stay awake, know where the exits are not because you plan to use them but because knowing gives you choice. That was a version of careful he could work with. The car came at 9, and somewhere across Midtown, in a building Darius had never been inside, a clock that nobody could see was ticking down. 48 hours. Starting now. Voss did not explain power like a man who enjoyed having it. That was the first thing Darius noticed about the conversations that followed the move, the ones that happened in the study of the new residents on the Upper West Side, a building that smelled like old books and filtered air and the ghost of pipe smoke from some previous tenant. Voss spoke about power the way a carpenter speaks about load-bearing walls. Not with pride, with respect for what it could do if it failed. Darius paid attention to that distinction. Men who enjoyed power were loud about it. Loud in ways they didn't always recognize. In the pace of their decisions, the way they filled a room, the particular energy of someone who has learned that their presence is supposed to mean something. Voss was not loud. He was precise. There was a difference between a man who wielded power because he liked the feeling of it and a man who wielded it because he had determined it was the most efficient tool available for a specific purpose. One of them was dangerous in obvious ways. The other was dangerous in ways that required more careful observation to see. Darius was observing. Loud revenge is expensive, Voss said on the third evening. It costs more than what it returns. They were sitting, Darius at the small table near the window, Voss in the chair across from him, the audio files from the day's translation work stacked between them. They had developed something that was not quite a routine but functioned like one. Darius translated. Voss listened. They talked afterward, in the way people talk when they have been focused together on something difficult and the tension needs somewhere to go. Explain expensive, Darius said. When you retaliate loudly, Voss said, you announce what you know. You announce how you know it. You expose the methods. The people adjacent to the target close their networks. Records disappear. People who might have cooperated decide they can't afford to. He paused. You get the satisfaction of the response. You lose the ability to go deeper. And going deeper matters more to you. It always matters more, Voss said. The person who gave the order is not the problem. The person who built the system that allowed the order to be given without question. That is the problem. Darius turned his cup in his hands. Water, not coffee this time of night. You've been thinking about this for a long time, he said. Yes. Before the car. A pause. Before the car, Voss confirmed. Darius filed that. The car had not been the beginning of something. The car had been the moment a longer accumulation of pressure broke through the surface. The assassination attempt was a symptom, not the disease. How long? Darius said. Voss was quiet for a moment. For years, he said. I identified the anomaly in the chain of command 4 years ago. An authorization pattern that didn't follow the standard architecture. A signature that showed up on decisions it shouldn't have been near. He paused. But identifying an anomaly and proving the intention behind it are different problems. You need time to build something that holds when it's tested. 4 years of watching, Darius said. 4 years of watching, documenting, positioning the compliance structure so that when the moment came, there was nowhere for the evidence to go except where I needed it to go. A pause. What I didn't account for was impatience on their side. I thought I had more time. The car, Darius said. The car, Voss confirmed. There was something in that single sentence, the way he said it, flat and factual without performance, that told Darius more than any elaboration would have. The car had been a failure of his own calculation. He had miscalculated how close the edge was. He had been wrong about the timeline in a way that had nearly cost him everything. And he was sitting across from the person who had stopped that outcome, acknowledging it without drama. That required a particular kind of character. Darius noted it. The person the audit is closing in on, Darius said carefully. They built the system. Over years, Voss said. Patient, strategic. Every layer designed to have a fall person at every level. The executive who authorized the hit believed he was following orders. The person below him believed the same. Insulation all the way down. Until the bottom. Until the bottom. A pause. Where a maintenance team installed something in a vehicle and a blind man on 54th Street heard things they thought no one would understand. Darius was quiet for a moment. I think about that sometimes, he said. Whether I was just in the right place. Or whether, he stopped. Whether it was something specific about you, Voss said. Yes. Voss considered this. You notice things other people decide aren't worth noticing, he said finally. Most people hear 2 men speaking Russian near a car and assign it to noise. It doesn't connect to anything in their framework because they've already decided that what's happening around them is ordinary. He paused. You don't have that assumption. You can't afford it. Darius absorbed that. He wasn't sure if it was a compliment or an observation. Maybe both. Maybe neither. The audit, he said. When it's complete, what does the restructuring look like? 3 divisions dissolved. Responsibilities redistributed. A compliance layer that doesn't report to the people it's supposed to be watching. Voss said it evenly. No satisfaction in his voice. Not celebration. Documentation. 14 senior positions affected. 4 of those are exits. The others are reassignments to roles with less access. No criminal prosecution. For some. For the ones who acted on manufactured orders. No. For the origin point, that's a different conversation. The legal exposure is real. We're not the only ones with evidence now. Who else has evidence? Darius said. The compliance audit generated documentation that has been shared carefully with a regulatory body. Not public. Not yet. But they are aware. They are watching. A pause. When it moves on multiple fronts simultaneously. That's the only way to prevent any single point of exit. Darius processed the scope of that. Multiple fronts. Regulatory. Internal. Legal. All timed. That's not revenge, he said. No, Voss said. It's not. That's architecture. A beat of silence. Yes, Voss said. Quietly. Like the word meant something. It was the first time since the move that Darius had the sense that he had said something that actually landed. Not impressed Voss, that wasn't quite the right word. Something closer to reached him. Made contact with something that was usually behind glass. He didn't push it. He had learned a long time ago that the moments when another person lets you in are fragile ones. Pressure ruins them. The advisory position, Darius said, moving to safer ground. Yes. Voss was matter-of-fact again. The audit team found your work on the multilingual communications valuable. There are ongoing compliance concerns that a person with your particular skill set would be useful to address. He paused. Formally. With compensation. Darius let that sit for a moment. I'm a man who sells key fobs near a plaza in Midtown, he said. You are a man who identified an assassination attempt through the open air of a public street by translating a conversation most people in this city wouldn't have recognized, let alone understood, Voss said. The key fobs are a detail. Darius almost laughed. He didn't, but it was close. A formal arrangement would require paperwork, he said. Legal documentation. Background checks, presumably. Presumably. And my background includes 11 years in the New York shelter system. No permanent address. No employment history that looks like this. None of that is disqualifying, Voss said. What you can do is what matters. Pause on that. A man like Kaelor Voss, who ran an organization with international reach and multiple divisions and a corporate structure complex enough to hide a years-long internal threat, was sitting in a study on the Upper West Side telling a blind Omega from Woodside that his background didn't disqualify him. Not as charity, as a practical statement of fact. Darius felt something shift in him. Small. Slow. The particular shift of a person who has spent a very long time building walls and is realizing, in the quiet of a well-lit room on an ordinary evening, that one of the walls has been unnecessary for a while now and just hasn't come down yet. He didn't take it apart tonight. I'll think about it, he said. Take the time you need, Voss said. He said it without pressure. Without the undertone of a man who expected a particular answer and was simply waiting for it to arrive. Darius noted that too. Later, when the building had gone fully quiet and the study was empty and he was back in the room set aside for him, this one with bookshelves on 2 walls and a window that faced east, he thought about what it meant to be seen as valuable. Not useful as a charity case. Not tolerated as a witness. Valued. There is a difference between a person who finds you useful because you are currently solving a problem they have and a person who finds you valuable because of what you are when no specific problem is present. Darius had experienced the first kind of usefulness his entire life. He knew its shape. It was warm while it lasted and cool when it ended, and it had an expiration date attached to it that both parties understood even if neither mentioned it. What Voss was offering sounded different. He had spent so long being careful that he had forgotten there was a version of the world where careful wasn't the only option available to him. He sat with that in the dark for a long time, And in the morning, Celestine Adeyemi called with news that changed the shape of everything. The structured network, she said. The one connected to the cypress shells. One of the entities has appeared in a regulatory filing that dropped this morning. A pause. Darius. The name attached to the filing is someone inside the Voss organization. Senior level. He already knew. But having Celestine confirm it from an entirely separate direction, from outside the audit, from outside Voss's walls, told him something important. The architecture was holding multiple fronts. He texted Voss 2 words. Celestine confirmed. The response came in 4 minutes. Said, I know. Tonight. Tonight. And for the first time since October, Darius Okafor felt something that was almost not relief, not yet, but the first edge of it. The sense that the shape of a thing was finally becoming visible. The question was what would be left standing when the visibility fully arrived. The call came at 11:47 at night. Darius was awake. He had stopped pretending he could sleep before midnight since all of this started. He sat in the chair near the east-facing window, a cup of tea going cold on the table beside him, listening to the building settle into its nighttime rhythms, the elevator at its lowest traffic, the pipes doing their slow work, the occasional sound of a car on the street below. He had been thinking about Jerome's face. Not literally, he had never seen Jerome's face. But he had built a sense of him through 2 weeks of close proximity work. Jerome was careful with information, precise. He had the controlled effect of someone who had been trained in environments that required emotional neutrality. But there was something else underneath it, a genuine attention, a real investment in the work that went beyond professionalism. He asked follow-up questions that were good questions. He remembered context from one session to the next. Yesterday Jerome had said, very casually at the end of a session, the shelter director called the contact line. She wanted to know when you were coming back. Said the kids have been asking. He had said it without looking up from his notes, without staging it. Just information delivered in the same even tone as everything else. The kids have been asking. Darius had spent 11 years at St. Augustine's as a resident and then as an informal fixture. The man who made things with his hands and sometimes sat with the younger residents who were having a hard time, not offering advice exactly, just presence. Just the company of someone who also knew what it meant to be in a place you hadn't chosen and was choosing anyway to be there fully. The kids have been asking. He was still holding that when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered. Silence. Not empty silence. The silence of someone who has dialed and is now deciding whether to speak. Darius waited. You're the one who stopped the car, a man's voice said finally. Low, careful, not aggressive, cautious. The blind man. Darius said nothing. I'm not calling to threaten you, the voice said. I need you to know that first. All right, Darius said. I'm the one who placed the device, the voice said. Darius went absolutely still. He thought about Celestine's filed record. Timestamped. Sealed. He thought about the distance between this chair and the door. He thought about the guard downstairs and whether the guard's shift had changed at 11. He kept his voice exactly level. You're cooperating with the audit, Darius said. A pause. Yes. Then why are you calling me? Because you're the one who stopped it, the voice said. And because a long pause, the sound of someone doing difficult interior work. I need you to know that I didn't know about the orders. I believed. They made me believe the authorization was real, that it had come down the legitimate chain, that I was performing a sanctioned action. His voice cracked just slightly at the edge of the word sanctioned. I am not a man who does that, who would do that. If I had known. Darius listened. This was the thing about listening. Really listening, the way he had learned to listen in 11 years without sight. People tell you the truth more than they mean to. The voice knows. The catch in a syllable, the particular break at the edge of a word, the way breath changes when a person is saying something that costs them. These are not things that can be controlled by someone trying to perform sincerity. This man was not performing. He was in pain. Real pain has a specific texture. It is not theatrical. It does not crescendo at the right moments or resolve neatly at the end. It is jagged and uneven, and it costs the person every word. This voice was costing this man every word. I believe you, Darius said. Another pause. Longer. The man who manufactured the orders, Darius said carefully. Has he been identified in the audit? Yes. Flat. Certain. And the audit team knows everything you know. Everything. Then what you need, Darius said, is not to talk to me. What you need is already in motion. A long silence. I needed to say it to the person who was at the other end of it, the voice said. That's all. Darius understood that. Not abstractly, specifically. The need to account for a thing to the person it almost destroyed. The need for the acknowledgement to land somewhere real rather than into a legal file. Legal files don't receive things the way a person does. They catalog. They archive. They do not register the weight of what they're being told. This man needed the weight to land somewhere. I hear you, Darius said. 3 words. They seemed to be enough. The call ended without ceremony. Darius set the phone down and sat in the dark for a long time. He thought about Helena Bonder, who had taught him that language was the thing that couldn't be taken from you. He thought about what it meant that a man who had been used as a weapon was now using the only tool available to him. His voice, his account, his cooperation, to dismantle the thing that had used him. He thought about systems, how they create people, how they shape people into the tool the system needs and then leave those people carrying the weight of actions they barely understood. He thought about the executive Marcus had interrogated, the one who had believed he was following legitimate authority, who had been made into a mechanism by someone who never had to get their hands on the mechanism themselves. He thought about all the people in all the systems who had done something they were told to do by someone they trusted, someone with the appearance of authority, and had carried the consequence while the architect walked away clean. That was the real shape of it. That was what made his jaw tight even now, sitting in the quiet of a room on the Upper West Side with his cold tea. Not the car. Not the danger. Not even the 11 days of displacement and careful invisibility. The system that made it possible. The architecture that allowed one person to move pieces across a board without ever touching the board directly. He was still thinking when his phone buzzed again. Voss. Not a call this time. A message. Said, the origin point has been identified. Regulatory notification goes out at 6 a.m. I thought you should know before it's public. Darius read it twice. Then he typed, what happens to the executive who authorized it? The response took 3 minutes. Removed from the organization. Civil liability. Cooperating fully. He'll spend a long time rebuilding something. But he won't be prosecuted criminally. Darius looked at that for a moment. Systemic justice. Not the justice of punishment. The justice of removal. Restructuring. Accountability distributed across the architecture rather than collapsed into a single person's consequence. He typed. And the origin point? The response was immediate this time. Federal. 1 word. Federal. Darius set the phone down again. Picked up his cold tea. Drank some of it. He thought about October. The cold wrist under his fingers. The 3 words he had said before he knew what would come after. Don't get in that car. And the unspoken extension of that sentence. The part he hadn't said out loud. The part that had driven his hand forward when everything sensible told him to keep walking. Because I can hear you. Because I understand what you're walking toward. Because knowing and walking away is its own kind of failure, a quiet one, a private one, but a failure nonetheless. He didn't think of himself as brave. He had never thought of himself that way. Brave implied a choice made with full knowledge of what it would cost. He had made the choice fast, in the space between a footstep and a heartbeat, before the cost was visible. That wasn't bravery. That was something simpler and harder to name. Maybe it was just this. He had heard something and he had acted on it, and he had not looked for a reason not to. That might not sound like much. Turned out to be everything. He sat with it. Outside, the city made its nighttime sounds. Distant traffic. Cab somewhere. The particular quiet of a street that has decided it's done for the day. In 6 hours, a regulatory notification would go out. In the morning, the shape of things would be different. Darius Okafor, who had built his life on invisibility, who had counted bus change by texture and mapped the city by wind and learned that safety lives in not being seen, was about to have his name attached to something much larger than himself. Not publicly. He had chosen to keep it internal for now. But the people who would read that audit, the people inside Voss's organization who would see the reconstructed chain of events, they would know. Some of them would look for him. Some of them would form opinions about him based on what they read in a document. He would be real to people he had never met. That was new. He wasn't entirely sure how to carry that. He had spent so long being invisible to people who were standing right next to him. The idea that he would be visible, present, real, consequential, to people who had never been in the same room with him required a different kind of bearing. He sat at the window and listened to the street and thought about Jerome saying the kids have been asking. He thought about going back. He thought about what it would mean to go back now, having been wherever this was. Whether the shelter would feel the same. Whether he would feel the same inside it. Whether the careful, minimized version of himself that had lived there, the version who moved his selling position daily and didn't ask for things and stayed quiet in the administrative spaces and made himself easy to overlook, whether that version still fit. He wasn't sure. There is a moment, sometimes, when a thing becomes real. Not when it happens. When it happens, you're too inside it to see it. But later, in the quiet, when the action has passed and the consequence is still forming and you sit in a dark room drinking cold tea and understand, finally, what you did. Darius had that moment at approximately 12:43 in the morning. He sat in it. Then he got up, made fresh tea and went back to the window. Because the morning was coming whether he was ready or not. And he had decided, somewhere between October and now, that he was done waiting for readiness. Readiness was a story he had told himself for a long time. Wait until things are stable. Wait until it's safer. Wait until the conditions are right. It was a reasonable story. It had kept him functional. But it had also kept him small, and small had its costs, and he was only now, at 12:43 in the morning in a borrowed room on the Upper West Side, beginning to see the full invoice for those costs. He was done waiting. The morning would come. He would meet it standing. The rooftop was Voss's idea. Darius would not have guessed that. He had assembled an image of Kaelor Voss, careful, controlled, a man who kept every interaction within environments he had structured and could read, and a rooftop did not fit that image. Rooftops were open. Wind moved unpredictably on rooftops. There were variables. But it was Voss who said, on the morning after the regulatory filing, "Come upstairs. The roof is accessible. I think you might want air." Darius did want air. He had wanted air since October. The roof access was through a door at the end of the 8th floor hallway. The stairs up were 12 steps, he counted. The door pushed out with a pressure bar, and the air that came through was different from street air. Cleaner at this height. Thinner. The sound of the city below was present but flattened, like someone had turned the volume down and slightly muffled the bass. He heard Voss's footsteps stop a few feet to his left. He found the railing with his cane and stood beside it. For a few minutes, neither of them said anything. This was, Darius realized, the first time they had been in a space together that neither of them had chosen for strategic reasons. No audio files. No audit updates. No information to exchange. Just the city below and the November air and two people who had ended up in each other's orbit through a sequence of events that neither of them would have predicted. "The regulatory filing went public an hour ago," Voss said eventually. "I know. Celestine texted me." "How is she?" An unexpected question. "Professional," Darius said. "She expressed what she called measured relief and then told me she had 3 other cases to get to. Something that might have been a sound of amusement from Voss's direction. Not a laugh. Just the edge of one. "The restructuring announcement goes out this afternoon," Voss said. "Internal first. Then public. 3 divisions. 14 positions." A pause. "It will generate questions. About me. About the chain of events. The vehicle. How it was discovered. The timeline." He paused. "Your name will not be in the public communication. I want to be clear about that. But in the internal review, the people who read it will know. The people in your organization." "Yes." Darius processed that. A closed circle of knowledge. Controlled. Deliberate. His name known inside the walls without being broadcast outside them. Is that your choice or mine? He asked. A pause. Yours, Voss said. Entirely yours. If you want your involvement documented and public, I will not stand in the way of that. If you want your name kept from the public record, I can arrange it. Whatever you decide, that's the arrangement. Darius turned that over. It was the kind of offer that could be a manipulation. Let me decide for you what kind of credit you get. Could be control dressed as generosity. But the shape of it didn't feel like that. The shape of it felt like a man who had spent the last weeks watching someone navigate an impossible situation with a grace he had not expected, and deciding, out of something he didn't fully understand yet himself, to give that person actual agency. Keep it internal for now, Darius said. I'll let you know if that changes. All right. The wind shifted. From the south. Warmer than the north wind, which meant the temperature was going to drop tonight. He could tell by the particular way warm southern air smells when it's about to be replaced by something colder. You do that a lot, Voss said. Do what? Pause. Then respond. Like you're running the information through something before it comes out. Darius considered this. I'm reading the air, he said. Temperature shift. Wind direction. It tells me things about what the weather will do in the next few hours. Silence. You just told me something real, Voss said, quietly. I tell you real things regularly, Darius said. You pay attention to the ones that suit the situation. Another pause, but this one different. Not processing. Not calculating. Something more like caught. That's fair, Voss said. Darius kept his hands on the railing. Why do you keep coming back? He asked. He said it simply. No performance in it. Just the question. The one he had been carrying since the coffee shop on 116th, since the second residence, since the evenings in the study when the audio work was done and the conversation continued anyway. What do you mean? Voss said. The audit is resolved. The regulatory filing is done. The restructuring is in process. Whatever immediate threat existed around my involvement has been reduced significantly. He paused. You don't need to be present here. You have people who could manage the remaining logistics. But you're here. You have been here. Most evenings. Why? A long silence. This was the longest one yet. Darius counted 7 seconds. Then Voss said, I don't know. Not deflection. Not the shaped non-answer of a man who knows and is choosing not to say it. Something more uncomfortable than that. The actual truth of not knowing. The admission of a thing that has been happening to a person without their full understanding of it. Darius heard it. He heard the difference. That's an honest answer, he said. I don't have another one right now, Voss said. I keep returning. I've noticed. I haven't. He stopped. I haven't trusted someone's read of a situation in years. Their actual read. Without wondering what they wanted from it. A pause. You don't want anything from it. I want the shelter to keep the new roof, Darius said. The edge of a sound from Voss's direction again. Closer to an actual laugh this time. That's already done, Voss said. Then I want. Darius stopped. Considered. I want to know what comes next. For you. Not the restructuring. Not the organization. For you specifically, after all of this is settled. Silence. I haven't thought that far, Voss said. You plan everything else 6 moves ahead. This is different. Why? Another long pause. The wind shifted again. Darius felt it move across the back of his hand on the railing. The particular brush of air that carries a temperature change inside it. I don't know how to plan for something I don't have a category for, Voss said finally. And that was the most unguarded thing Kaelor Voss had said in the entire duration of their acquaintance. Darius heard it land in the air between them. He didn't push. He didn't ask the follow-up question. He just stood there on the rooftop with his hand on the cold railing and let the moment exist without forcing it into a shape it wasn't ready to take yet. The city moved below them, and Darius, very slowly, moved his hand along the railing. Just a few inches. until it was close. He didn't reach. He didn't take. He just left it there, available, and waited to see what Voss would do. He felt Voss go very still beside him. Not the predator stillness of the first moment on the sidewalk in October. Something else. The stillness of a person standing at the edge of a choice they've been approaching for a long time and are only now, in this exact moment, close enough to see. Darius kept his hand where it was. "Why me?" he asked softly. Just those two words. Into the wind. Into the November air. Into the quiet of a rooftop above a city that didn't know any of this had happened. Why me? Of all the people in New York. Of all the people in the world. Why the blind Omega with the basket and the cane and the 11 years of careful invisibility? Why did you keep coming back to me specifically? Voss was silent for a very long time. The kind of silence that is not the absence of an answer. The kind that is the answer trying to form itself. It rained on the first Thursday in December. Not the dramatic kind. Not the rain of October storms and wind-driven water. The quiet kind. The kind that starts before you notice it, that coats everything in a thin gray layer and makes the city smell like it's been washed and dried and left out in the cold to think about itself. Darius noticed it from the east-facing window at 7 in the morning. The smell first, mineral and clean, the particular December version of wet concrete that is different from November wet concrete in a way he could not explain to anyone who hadn't spent 11 years paying this much attention. Then the sound of it on the glass. Even, light, patient. He thought about October. He stood at the window with his coffee and thought about a different morning. A different kind of cold. A different street. The 54th Street sidewalk. The metallic smell that didn't belong. The wrist that had gone still beneath his fingers. How different everything had been then. How much smaller his world had been then, by necessity, by design, by the long practice of making himself unnoticeable. How his life had been organized around the principle that the safest place is the place no one is looking. And then one morning he had grabbed a stranger's wrist. And the principle had failed. Or, he turned the thought over. The principle had always been a coping mechanism dressed as a strategy. Invisibility wasn't safety. It was postponed exposure. A way of living that assumed the world's indifference could be made permanent if you were just careful enough, quiet enough, small enough. He hadn't been small on that October morning. He had been precisely and exactly himself. And something had shifted in the world as a result. He heard footsteps on the stairs at 8:15. Voss's stride, which he now knew the way he knew the stride of the shelter director and the morning vendor on 52nd and the man with the worn left heel on the Hargrove building steps. Distinct, recognizable, unreplicable. The knock on his door. "Come in," Darius said. Voss came in and didn't say anything immediately. Darius heard him cross to the window, the other window, the one on the south wall, and stand there for a moment. "It's raining," Voss said. "I know. The regulatory process is complete. The federal case is formally opened. My legal team says it moves from here without requiring additional input from either of us." Darius heard the subtext in that. From here. The point at which the machine runs on its own. The point at which two people who have been held in proximity by the pressure of a situation are no longer held there by necessity. "And the restructuring," he said. "Finished. Effective as of yesterday. The new compliance layer is in place. The 4 exits are done." A pause. "The organization is different now. Better, I think. It will take time to know." Darius nodded slowly. "The advisory arrangement," Voss said. "That offer stands. Regardless of," he stopped. Started again. "It stands on its own merits. It is not contingent on anything else." "I know," Darius said. "Do you have an answer?" Darius had been turning the offer over for 3 weeks. He had talked to Celestine about it. She had asked him 3 questions. Does it use what you're actually good at? Does it compromise anything you're not willing to compromise? Is the person making the offer someone whose motives you understand? He had answered yes, no, and mostly. He thought mostly was enough. "Yes," he said. "I'll take it." He heard Voss exhale. Just slightly. The controlled exhale of a man who had been holding something and is now allowed to set it down. "Good," Voss said. Simply, they stood in their respective windows for a moment. The rain continued its quiet work on the glass. On the rooftop, Darius said. You never answered. A pause. No, Voss said. You paused for a very long time. I know. And then you didn't pull away, Darius said. From my hand. You didn't move toward it either. But you didn't pull away. Silence. The rain on the glass was steady, patient, not going anywhere. I've spent a long time, Voss said slowly, in environments where every gesture has a calculation behind it. Every approach is a strategy. Every offered hand is a negotiation. He paused. You offered your hand without wanting anything from it. I wanted an answer, Darius said. You wanted an honest answer, Voss said, which is different. Most people want the answer that helps them. You wanted the true one. Darius absorbed that. What's the true one? He said. Voss was quiet for a moment. You hear what others ignore, he said finally. Simple. Clean. For words. Darius had heard the sentence forming on the rooftop, had felt it approaching the way you feel weather approaching by pressure change, by the quality of the air. But hearing it completed was different from anticipating it. He felt it settle. Not a declaration of feeling, not the large, sculpted kind of thing people say in movies. Just a specific, true observation about what Voss had noticed about him and why it mattered. You hear what others ignore. Come with me, Voss said. Darius tilted his head. Where? Same street, Voss said. 54th. I have a morning meeting. He stopped. Adjusted. I want to walk there. Darius set down his coffee. He found his cane. He found his jacket. He listened to Voss wait. Patiently, without the specific kind of impatience that most people carry when they are waiting for a disabled person to be ready, and he noted the absence of that impatience the way he noted everything else. With attention, with its proper weight. The elevator, the lobby, the building's front entrance, and the particular way the December air hit differently from above. At street level it had more mass to it, more presence, cold and wet and carrying the smell of the city in its winter mode. He found Voss beside him, not ahead of him, not a half step behind in the way people position themselves when they are performing consideration without actually giving it. Beside him, they walked. No guards close. That was different too. Darius could hear two people at a distance. Not hovering, not within earshot. Present, but distant. The city did what it always did. It moved around them without accommodation, without making space, indifferent in the particular New York way that was not personal and was somehow, because of that, easier to exist inside than the attention of people who thought they were being helpful. Darius counted the turns. The familiar texture of different blocks underfoot. The smell of the 52nd Street cart. Different vendor today, a younger voice, but the same cart. The sound of buses and the particular horn of a cab that had a bent front panel. He'd heard that horn before, it had a rattle inside the honk. 54th came up. They crossed it. And at the corner, where in October there had been a car idling and two voices speaking Russian and a smell that didn't belong, there was nothing now. Just the sidewalk. Just the rain. Just the city moving forward in the way it always moved. Voss stopped. Darius stopped beside him. This is where it started, Voss said. Yes. A pause. I've come back here a few times, Voss said. Since October. Darius hadn't known that. Why? He said. Voss was quiet for a moment. To understand what I almost lost, he said. And he paused. To understand what I didn't know I was missing. Darius stood on the wet sidewalk with the December rain on his shoulders. He felt Voss's hand find his. Not the grip of the rooftop moment, not the almost and not quite. A full, deliberate contact. Palm against palm. Fingers that closed slowly. Giving him time. Giving him every kind of time. Darius did not pull away. He had known this was coming. In the way he knew, whether not by prediction but by accumulation. By the small signs that stack up quietly until the shape of the thing becomes clear. He had not been afraid of it. He had been waiting to see if it would be offered honestly. It was. You could have told me earlier, Darius said quietly. Into the rain. into the sound of 54th Street doing its morning work around them. I could have, Voss said. I didn't know how. What changed? A pause. Long. The kind that has real substance in it. You asked why me? Voss said. On the rooftop. And I stood there and I didn't have the answer. And then I realized. He stopped. The reason I didn't have the answer wasn't because the feeling wasn't there. It was because the feeling didn't have a category. I had spent years in environments where connection has a transaction attached to it, where closeness is a leverage point. A pause. You don't operate like that. You never have. And I didn't know what to do with something that didn't have a transaction in it. Darius let that sit for a moment. It doesn't, he said, have a transaction in it. I know, Voss said. That's what took me time. They stood there, the rain on their shoulders, the city around them. Two people on a sidewalk where, 2 months ago, everything had almost gone entirely differently. Darius felt the warmth of Voss's hand in his. Specific. Real. The cold iron of first impressions had softened into something else. Not soft exactly, but less defended. The cedar smell was still there. The weight of his presence was still there. But the glass was down. He thought about October. He thought about the wrist under his fingers. The 3 words he had said. Don't get in that car. He thought about how far those 3 words had carried. Into glass offices and audiophiles and shelter renovations and regulatory filings and rooftop silences and December rain on a sidewalk on 54th Street. He thought about all the mornings he had walked this route invisibly. How the invisibility had felt like armor and functioned like a prison. How he had built it carefully, layer by layer, and how it had taken one moment, one hand reaching out, to begin the slow work of taking it apart. He wasn't entirely without it now. He didn't know if he ever would be. But here, in this moment, on this street, with this particular hand in his, he was less inside it. He was more outside himself. And outside himself felt like it had more room. I didn't know, Darius said quietly. Into the morning. Into Voss's silence. Didn't know what? Voss said. Whether you chose me because I saved you. He paused. Or because I saw you. Voss was still. The rain continued its patient work. I don't know that I've been seen in a long time, Voss said finally. Not past the surface of what I do. Past the weight of it. A pause. You see past it. You always have. Since the first moment. I can't see anything, Darius said. I know, Voss said. That's why. A long silence. Not empty. Full. The kind of silence that 2 people make together when they have stopped needing to fill it. Darius stood on 54th Street in the December rain with Kaelor Voss's hand in his and felt the city move around them and thought about invisibility. About how he had built it. About who he had built it for. About what it had cost him to stop, for one moment, being invisible. He didn't pull away. He might be afraid to ask the full question. The one underneath the why. The one about what comes after this moment, and the one after that, and the long slow work of 2 people learning the shape of each other. He might be afraid, but his hand was there, and Voss's hand was there, and the rain was quiet, and for the first time in a long time, Darius Okafor was not invisible. He was just present, on a sidewalk in December, in a city that was finally, slowly learning to see him. If the story moved something in you, if you saw yourself in Darius, in the quiet courage of someone who stopped walking when everything said to keep moving, drop it in the comments. Tell us the moment you stopped being invisible. Tell us about the hand you reached out and the wrist that didn't pull away. And if you want to be here when the next story drops, subscribe and turn on notifications. Every story on this channel is built for the people who show up and actually feel things. Don't miss what comes next. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. You never know who's waiting for exactly this story.